We started.
We are started.
Good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is CPOC's commissioner meeting is hereby called to order. The time is now 6:10 p.m. My name is Hassan Bennett. I am the interim chair of the Citizens Police Oversight Commission. I will be facilitating this meeting. This is a public meeting of the Citizens Police Oversight Commission that was advertised pursuant to the Sunshine Act. First, I'll start with roll call. John Solomon. John Solomon is not here. Hopefully he taps in later. Until then, this will be an unexcused absence. Melanie DeBoer.
Commissioner DeBose is present.
Hakeem PA.
Commissioner PA present.
Commissioner Hassan Bennett, I am present. And with that, we have the roll. Next, we'll go on to Commissioner Bennett. Do I hear a motion to approve this evening's agenda?
I
I
motion.
move that we approve the agenda for this evening's meeting.
And Commissioner PA, I take it you second that?
I'll second. Yes.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. With that, the meeting minutes, the meeting agenda will be approved. Next, we'll go a report from National Association of Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, also known as NACO. They had a conference last week, so we'll receive a report on it. Am I giving a report? Oh, I'm giving a report. Oh, well, how dandy. Well, last week we had a conference of NACO. It started on Saturday. This was NACO's first time having a commissioner's portion of NACO. The commissioner's portion started Sunday. Let me look at my calendar, please forgive me. Sunday the 13th was the commissioner and executive director's portion of NACO, and then everyone else had several sections, different training sessions throughout the week. In my opinion, and my experience of NACO was definitely an eye-opener for oversight. NACO gave me positions and a perspective on how we operate as a board, how each agency operates. And also it let me see where other oversight agencies throughout the United States of America where we sat in comparison to other agencies and commissioners we are well. You should be proud of yourself and your dedication towards the civilian police oversight. One thing I learned in attending NACO, and I'm gonna go back to my notes, that civilian oversight did not just begin in the 2000s, right? Civilian oversight, Philadelphia was the third major city to pick up on civilian oversight. It was proposed by New York first, then DC picked it up, and then we picked it up in 1958. One thing that did surprise me is civilian oversight dated back to 1928. And I think it's the Wishington Commission, Wickerson Commission was one of the first commissions in civilian oversight that was who's the chair of that commission was Hoover. That was a surprise to find out that oversight was a thing during the prohibition in response to law enforcement and the prohibition. So also, so that was a good thing. Another thing was good to learn is the dynamics of group dynamics, to see where we land in group dynamics. And in my opinion, and observing where we are, I think as a commission, we stand as we are in the third stage of group dynamics, right? So I thank you. I've learned a lot in serving with and serving as a commissioner. I thank you guys for sticking with the commission. We all have differences, but the four of us as commissioners has moved with the interest of the agency. And I just wanted to thank you guys. And we sat down and mapped this agent, well, not mapped out, fought through a lot of bad press, trainings, good trainings, and we've grown as a commission. Another thing I wanted to say about NACO gave me a chance to sit down with the rest of the agency and see where their sites was and their positions and as a commission, right? We enjoyed some times together out in NACO. We got a chance to learn each other. And I can say that everyone is dedicated to their role in this commission and seeing this commission push forward. One of the good things in the leadership training is I was able to sit and during the training, our executive things that our executive director does during the meetings and how she operates during the meetings, as well as Miss Talia. I was able to see why they did certain things. I remember after the leadership training, I ran Miss McClary like, I know why you ask those questions now. I know exactly why you ask those questions. And she said, see, so during NACO, we shared a lot of ideas together and where we want to see this agency. And ideas, one thing about seeing where other oversight agencies and hearing what oversight is done. While at these agencies, ideas are going to continue popping up at your head, and you being able to bounce your ideas off somebody from Long Beach, California, as far as San Francisco, and see what they're doing, what deep people in for agencies in Detroit is doing. I spent a lot of time with the Detroit and Cleveland agency. It's good to see where we are and where we can be. So NACO is definitely an eye opener, and we are trying to get NACO in Philadelphia. Ain't that right, Miss McClare? We are trying to bring NACO to Philadelphia by 2026. All right. We got the beginning. We're strategizing to get that here. Would anybody like to add anything in regards to the NACO conference? No, I want you guys to add something regarding the NACO conference. Anybody that was there, please.
Just so you know, Chair, when I slides, I actually have a presentation as well. I think from some of my team. So you got
Director McClary is not coming across clearly.
You're going in and out.
No.
Mute and unmute again, Tanya. It might work that way. I think that's what happened last time.
Is that any better?
Yep.
Much better, thank you.
I'm going to say, Chairman, and during my portion, I'm going to talk about some things as well.
Again, Director McClary, you fading in and out.
We gotta help Miss McClure.
All right,
All right, there you go.
try it again. I was saying that during my portion, I will give a report out, but I would like some of my team to respond to the chair's request for comments and thoughts.
Perhaps you can advise the public as to who went and what roles they play here and what roles they engaged in at NACO.
I'm gonna go ahead and unmute myself. I put my hand up, but we had a good group from NACO this year. I'll say thanks to Tanya for really prioritizing staff going to NACO. We had, I think, representatives of every unit. And something, she's been a part of the NACO organization, which is the professional organization for civilian oversight for a long time. And some of us had had the opportunity to go in the past, but this year might have been our largest contingent. And she also was involved with helping NACO develop what's called a certification for practitioner of oversight. So that's attending a certain number of conferences and particular training sessions, and being able to get that certification in our particular subject matter area. So I'm excited for the staff who are working their way towards that or may already be there. I think that's wonderful. I would mostly just echo the chair's comments. I thought it was great to be in sessions together and be able to discuss things. There are also a number of parts during the conference when there are parallel sessions, and you can choose which panel appeals to you the most or is most interesting to you. And I felt that the sort of cross-pollination, the discussion that we had afterwards, where people would share what they found really useful from various panels, and what sort of is a good idea for us to build upon. So I believe there's also a blog post coming out of our office in the next week or so. Some staff have been contributing their thoughts and our communications team is writing that up. So mostly I just want to say thank you. And we had a really great opportunity. And before I turn it over, I did want to note for the chair and for the record that Commissioner Solomon was able to join us just shortly after you took roll, actually. And he put his apologies in the chat for being a couple minutes late.
Welcome, Commissioner Solomon.
Good evening.
Did you also want to contribute?
I was just going to say that I also echo the comments from Commissioner Hassan Bennett, that it was an awesome opportunity to not only get to know other oversight practitioners in other cities, but also get to spend dedicated time focused on oversight with Commissioner Bennett, you know, either at the hotel during sessions or also after sessions when we would get dinner together or be able to kind of make some food together and just spend some time together. It was a really quality time. But I also will be sharing more specific policy, specific information in my slides too, and I look forward to that. So thanks.
The administration like to contribute?
I mean, I'm assuming your mic not for a second, but I'm assuming that was to me. I mean, I think I just echo everything everybody else said. It was a really nice trip. There was a really great session on data that a few of us attended, and I think that'll be very valuable to the work that CPOC will do in the future and our negotiation for a data memorandum. And so as our director of admin, I was really fascinated with the work that one of the agencies within, or one of the departments within CCRB in New York was doing. And so I think that'll be really valuable for us. and how we move forward.
Is Nick here? I wanted to say, also, the way we covered each session was the way we divided up to cover each session, and that we worked as a team to actually get the most out of NACO. And that in itself was a growing experience for the agency that I appreciate as well. The actual I guess, am I froze? The next steps in planning, we'll see a lot of things in planning. Are we sharing the ideas now, or are we going to save those for another date? Ms. Tanya? There we go. Are we going to save those? Are we going to save those for another date and build on them more, or are we going to share it now?
It's up to you.
So I think one of the good ideas that we had was taking an oath as a commissioner. I think that was a much to show people the dedication you will be taking, or we will be taking, in regards to this commission, as well as another idea we had was helping the community build itself, empowering the community to build itself. It's a lot of this was one of the things I had thought of. It's a lot of community organizations that just maybe groups. They don't have the governing legislative or the governing letters to be an actual recognized organization. We want to help them become organizations, as well as finding people within the community that may not be commissioners, but once we reach the point of having committees, having community members serve in the committee as well. We have a good start. We have about 50 people or more that filed to be a commissioner. So I think that could be a good start from people that didn't make it, or possibly couldn't make it, or disqualified, but have, because it's one person per district. But we will find, once we break down into committees, we will have dedicated community members be a part of our committees as well. There's many more ideas that we have, but that's just to name the few. And once again, I'm just happy to be a part of NACO. Oh, by the way, I will be a part of the jails and prison oversight, as well as committee for NACO, and as well as the internal operations committee of NACO. So I encourage you all to go to the NACO site, and they have one-on-one sessions. I'll share the link for the one-on-one sessions with the commissioners. If you desire for a one-on-one session to talk about where you want to be or trainings you would like to see. But NACO is definitely a resource that isn't just once a year, and isn't just for those that were there. We have our own membership. So you all can utilize this moving forward to assist you in your commission position. With that being said, next we'll go on to agency business. And I'll pass it over to the director, the executive director, Ms. Tanya McClary again, for the Citizens Police Oversight Commission's agency report.
We'll see if it's working.
No. Yeah.
We can,
It's pretty consistent when you lean forward right now. We can hear it okay.
great. So we can go to the slides, would be great.
Can everybody see those?
Yes.
So to the community and welcome to the commissioners. This is the agency part of the report. So the Citizens Police Oversight Commission's mission is to oversee and investigate the conduct, policies, and practices of the Philadelphia Police Department. And so these are our current duties that we are taking on. We're receiving complaints of police misconduct, auditing and monitoring internal affairs investigations and police disciplinary processes. We sit and vote on the PBI panel at police discipline hearings. We conduct oversight of police shootings, analyze police data, develop policy recommendations and report, and we engage in outreach and training. And so in terms of that, this is outside of my slide. So today you see me a little bit more casual in my CPOC wear because we did some training today. I think it's really important for the public to understand that a lot of our training that we do sometimes is coupled with understanding how people are trained in the academy. So we spent some time today actually doing some reality-based training, trying to understand how officers make those split decisions about what types of force to use. And it was very engaging. I think that it's really important that whatever the police department you oversee, and of course, in this case, it's Philadelphia Police Department, that we know how they're trained. We know what they're learning in the academy. We're learning how to do things on the street. And so the good thing about for the commissioners, just so that you know, one of the things that I am going to be developing for you is a training calendar. And so you all will be able to start doing some of these trainings as well, to be able to understand how officers are being trained, to be able to understand what they're learning at the academy, so that you have firsthand knowledge and experience of those. And so look forward to that. I'll be working with the chair and working with our director of outreach and also our training manager to try to get a training schedule together for you all to be able to partake in those trainings. But it's very important to understand how that works and what goes into making those decisions in terms of when officers are using force. And so I was happy to say that quite a bit of our team was able to attend that today. So I'm a little more casually dressed than I would be for this type of meeting, for our commissioner meeting. I also want to talk about NACOL. And so this was the 30th year of NACOL. So NACOL's been around for 30 years and their theme was progress, preservation, and perseverance. So I think that's a lot of our same theme here in the city of Philadelphia, right? We're going to make some progress. We're going to do some preservation of the things that we are embedding into the city, and we're going to persevere. And so as the chair already stated, on Sunday, there were 2 special sessions. One was for executive leadership. And so in order to attend that, you had to be the head of an agency. I'm excited to know that they're trying to develop other training. So for example, I don't know if they'll have it by next year, but they also want to develop one potentially for like deputies. So people that are not the head of the agency, but have obviously a lot of stake in the agencies and other things that they're trying to do. But there was an entire session on executive leadership. And so I was actually able to present in that very first session. There was a workshop entitled Under-Resourced, Overcoming Funding and Staffing Issues. And so I think all of you know I've come from 2 other oversight agencies and cities. And so I have learned a lot firsthand about overcoming funding and staffing issues. And so it was I was very privileged to actually sit with on that panel, the police auditor from Alexandria, Mummy Ibrahim, and also the executive director from the CCRB in New York. And the 3 of us really took some time to really talk to other directors about the challenges that they're facing in terms of funding issues, staffing issues. And there was also a presentation during the first part of my workshop from the, Professor Fairley at the University of Chicago School of Law, who was instrumental in forming COPA, which is the Chicago's oversight agency. And she talked just a lot about what that was like forming that agency, but also her research has been in collecting data from oversight agencies throughout the years to look at the things that we talk about in terms of struggles. And so it was really fascinating to see her research about what she's finding, all the commonalities across the country about a lot of the struggles that oversight officers are having around funding, around staffing, and other issues. And so it was kind of sobering just to kind of see that data in one place and to be able to understand that in many ways that, you know, there still needs to be a lot of more things taken in consideration when cities are actually starting oversight agencies. And so it was really great. Other parts of the panel that day for us was managing mandates, right? And so we had a whole session on that last time about we have this piece of legislation, right? And how do we manage that? How do we manage as the agency and the board what the mandates for this, for CPOC? How do we manage that? How do we maintain public trust and things of that nature? And there was another session about managing yourself and managing others. This is a very high stress job. I've talked to a lot of people that have do this work. There's a lot of burnout. There's a lot of things. And so it's really important as the head of an agency to understand not only how to manage yourself, to make sure that people like me, for example, are taking self-care, but how do you manage others in this type of high stress, high volume type of work? And then we had a chance to break out into small groups, and we talked about a lot of pressing things that are facing oversight agencies. So it was really great to sit with my peer directors from all across the country and just talk through high level, give each other suggestions about a lot of the things that we're seeing across the country with our agencies. Next slide. So some other highlights, as the chair was talking about, there were some really informative workshops and plenary sessions. So I just pulled out a few. The conference actually started for everybody else on Monday and it went through Thursday. And so some of the interesting topics that we covered were advancing justice. So looking at what's going on with the DOJ, right? There's civil rights investigations. What cities are they potentially thinking about going to, cities where they currently are? And so a lot of people might understand this more as like consent decree cities. So where has the DOJ actually like come in and actually kind of the feds have taken over, so to speak. And so departments that are under consent decree, and also looking at the trends and stuff that they're finding. It was really great because they talked about the work they're doing around law enforcement, but also the work they're doing at jails and prisons to identify issues. There was a session on transparency, a bridge to trust and collaboration, how oversight agencies can share information with impacted families, the public, and the media. And obviously, it's no secret to anybody here, but for our community, this is important. We do have to understand how do we share information with the families that we come in contact with, the families that are impacted? How do we share information with the public and also the media? And so this was a really informative panel to really figure out, in doing that, how are we bridging trust and collaboration? There was a session on law enforcement interactions with persons experiencing behavioral health crisis and exploring alternative response models. And that is very important. In a city as big as Philadelphia, we do not have enough of the crisis team, right? There are so many people that are having behavioral health crisis. And those are some of the most cases where you will see uses of force, people being killed and so it is so important that police departments get this right, in terms of how are they interacting with people that are in a behavioral health crisis. There was a session on overcoming obstacles, strategies for effective oversight in law enforcement. And so that was a very deep panel because we told agencies were just really blunt about what has been happening to them, pushback in other cities. We had a city talk to us about once they really pressed hard on the city to be able to do their mandates, they started getting stuff canceling. So they got calls from the police chief saying, I'm not going to take any more meetings with you. I'm not going to do this for you. I'm not going to do that for you. And so it was like every director's nightmare, right? Is that we fight for our rights. We fight for what the people fought for, and then there's retaliation. And so it was a very sobering panel, because that's the thing that keep people like me up at night, worrying about, if we press too hard on what the community wants us to do, what are the repercussions of that? And so it was very sobering to hear how cities have actually faced repercussions and retribution, and how other cities have faced it and been able to pull through or not pull through. And so that was a very sobering workshop. There was one on the prosecutor and police oversight, seeking alignment. That's very interesting, right? When you think about the prosecutor's office, and are we always aligned? Are they always aligned with the visions of police oversight? And what does that look like? And how do you try to get that alignment? And also there was one on the intersection of criminal defense litigation and police oversight. And so these were just some of the highlights. You can still go to the NACO website and see the full agenda of workshops. And so this was just a kind of a snapshot. And as Catherine already talked about, we are going to be doing some staff development from these conferences. And so I am hoping to get the majority of my staff recognized as certified practitioners of oversight. And so I'm excited about that. We are going to be engaging in that process. And so I think it's really important that people see our staff as the professionals that they are. And so I'm trying to get as many of my staff to be certified practitioners of oversight as possible. So we can go to the next slide. And then here are just some pictures. Just some of the things that we can see. We right there with the chair. And this was right after a workshop. I can't remember, Chair, which workshop it was, but a bunch of us had attended a workshop. And so it was really great. And you'll just see opportunities where we were able to bond as a staff and with our board chair at the conference. So I will stop there and just see if anybody else wants to add anything. The chair's already engaged us a lot in this conversation, but if this brought up anything else for anybody, any other comments around NACO? And I think that Layla will be saying some things a little later as well, but yeah. And so just so the commission knows, my goal next year, if our budget gets passed, is to be able to budget in for maybe hopefully definitely 2, maybe 3 commissioners to go. So I think hearing that the chair had such a great experience, we will try to make sure that we can build in enough funding for at least 1 other person and maybe even 2 other commissioners to be able to attend. So I am very conscious of trying to make sure that we can build that in, because I do think it's important for you all to meet with your peers in other cities. Any questions or comments from the commissioners?
I have a
All right.
comment.
Okay, I'm sorry.
The legislation versus reality hurdles. that was an important session, as it spoke about what the legislative body says, right, versus the hurdles you come across to actually get this legislative body, get what you are promised in this legislative body, right? And to see how many, almost every oversight agency is doing the same thing or facing the same adversity as we are, and the strategies they are using to fulfill the legislation. Over the last 2 years, or especially over the last year and a half, we've been under constant media pressure, right? And maintaining our cool during the media pressure, as we understood it was hurdles that to conduct our independent investigations, but to hear that there are ways that other agencies, other oversight commissions were enduring the same thing, and get their suggestions when misinformation is being put out there via media or via individual. Many times we have just sat back and said, you know what, we're just going to ignore it and keep pushing along. But being able to counter that and put out the right information to the public, sharing it, using our networks, individual networks, to actually get the truth of the matter and the reality of the situation across, is the situations that, well, the solutions to the situations that we face. One thing that we have, I'll stop right there. We just have a lot of things on tools, resources that we can use that other agencies did not have the ability to use. And it was like, oh, you guys, you have the ability to do that. And I just to hear that people were excited about our agency when it came to those situations and giving us feedback to say, you know what, you can do that, you should do that. So that was another good session that me and Ms. McClary sat through together.
And to piggyback on the chairs, I think it was also interesting to learn, and so this is also for our community here in Philadelphia, is that a lot of cities put these ordinances and legislation in place knowing that the oversight agency can't do it without help.
Mm-hmm.
And then what they're finding is the will to do the help is not there a lot of times. And so they put it in saying, we know that these things need to happen, X, Y, Z needs to happen. But then when you go to ask for help with the X, Y, and Z, there's not a lot of support. And so I just want people to know that that's very common. And so a lot of legislation has a lot of power in some jurisdictions, but the ability to realize that power is not as simple as it seems. And then sometimes you don't get the support of the very people that passed the legislation, right, to be able to have you realize that. And so that was also just very interesting and just very sobering to know that in some cities, they know that the agency is going to have a lot of things to overcome, but then there's not the will to really help the agency overcome them. And so we just have to stay vigilant, right? And make sure that we're doing everything that we can do from our end, but we will always need the support of our community to help us if we're not able to achieve things in our own strength. So,
Ms. McClure, what was Anthony's name and role? the guy Anthony you introduced me to?
Fennell, he's the board chair for NACO.
Anthony Fennell said something during one of the sessions. He says, when you have commissioners, and I quoted it. He says, when you have commissioners that serve 2 or 3 years, you lose the continuity and you lose the validity of the commission. So as we go forth with the selection panel, I just wanted the commissioners that are watching, that are that are here in the meeting, and the people that would like to be the commission, to understand that we need dedication that lasts longer than just one term. We need dedication that lasts longer than just one term. And it's not just me that believes that, right? It's a national thing.
Sir, from the commissioners or questions?
Yes, I have a question. Commissioner Solomon here. Executive Director McCleary said some things that were very important to me. So my question, like according to the legislation, I know you mentioned how certain things are hard to realize according to the legislation. And based on that, are we clear on the things that we're experiencing as far as challenges that we're having issues with realizing, or it's like, are we clear about those things within the legislation?
Yeah. I know the commission, you all have been concerned about the public is independent investigations. So that's definitely one. It's the opinion of many folk that a lot of those things cannot happen unless they are in the collective bargaining agreement. And so since that's the primary belief, and a lot of those things are not in there, is one of the reasons why we haven't been able to do them. They need to be bargained for. And so I think I'm glad you asked that question, Commissioner Solomon. I think because that's really important, because I know a lot of the community has said, CPOC, we want you to be investigating. The commissioners all have said, we want you to be investigating. But if it's not in the collective bargaining unit right now, many pieces of that process is why we have not been able to move forward to actually do them. And so that's why I really wanted to, and I'm glad that the chair started that conversation, to just educate the community. It's not by lack of will of this agency or this board, but there are some tables that we need to get at and be at to be able to bargain these things and to really be able to push the powers that be forward to make it happen.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that's super important that the community understands, some of the challenges that goes into this process, because some might not be educated or some may not even know, and think that, we're not giving our very best to, realizing this legislation. So I appreciate that.
When it comes to that, the legislation and upholding the legislation or fighting for the legislation, I know me and my fellow commissioners have been dedicated to it. I think we're at this stage where we have to get the community support, and that was one of the things that was that was raised during NACO, is ensuring them that this is still a desire of the community. This is still a demand. Over 500,000 people voted for the CPOC legislation with hopes that we would be conducting independent investigation. Although we have had our George Floyd moment, it was just the Eddie Rosario moment, right? That we were we were blessed to overcome, but we have to reach out to our networks and design a way where we can show council and the mayor that this is still of importance before they go to the collective bargaining table. This is still what the community of Philadelphia is demanding. So I think that's a unified a unified move we have to make to where we get everyone together and we let our voices be heard. That was all we re-raise our voices that was already raised in the ballot decision.
So Philadelphia, listen out, listen out. We be doing a call out. We do, I agree with the chair. Over 500,000 of you spoke, and we want to do what you want us to do. And so we are going to need your support going forward to just remind folk that we are still relevant. The work that you wanted us to do is still relevant. So.
Ms. Tanya, I've stormed these streets with Commissioner Elder. I've stormed these streets with John Solomon. Let's figure it out. Let's figure it out. And I'll be glad to storm wherever I need to with them again.
So one of the things I'll just really quickly before we, normally there's a hearing before these, and so there's testimony. So there will be opportunities for the public to talk about their concerns if they have any. And I'm sure they do about the lack of CPOCs to be able to do what it needs to do. All right. We'll turn it over to our Director of Administration to talk about complaints.
Alrighty, so we have recently released our report for complaints that we received and referred to Internal Affairs during the month of September. It is now on our website, as you can see there. I'm just going to give a little bit of some summaries. The full list of summaries of all of the complaints that we received and referred in September is on in the full report, but here's just a few examples of some of the complaints we received. And I'll start by just saying these are summaries of allegations made by complainants which have not been investigated yet. They do not represent any findings or conclusions. The complainant pulled into a gas station and was approached by an officer while still in their vehicle, which was in park. The officer told the complainant that their front windshield was heavily tinted and asked for their license. About a week and a half later, they got a citation which stated the offense was operating a vehicle without wearing a seatbelt. The complainant feels this was inconsistent since the officer claimed the vehicle was heavily tinted and they were preparing to get out of their vehicle to get gas. Another complaint, the complainant witnessed an off-duty officer who is their neighbor arrive at home in plain clothing, intoxicated, and approximately about an hour later, the officer was dressed in full uniform headed to work, which is very concerning. And then another complaint we got, the complainant went to the SVU unit, the Special Victims Unit, to file a report. In the interview room that they waited in, it smelled like urine. When they asked to wait outside until the officers were ready for their interview, the officers and supervisor did not allow this, and they were rude and dismissive. The supervising officer provided contact information for a children's victim specialist to complete the interview. As of reporting the complaint, they had not heard back from the complaint to complete an interview. Next slide. These are some of our demographic data. The complaints that we received in September, there were 23 that we referred to Internal Affairs that we received. That brings our total for the year to 145. So these are the demographics for the entire year of 2024. You can see sort of this breakdown of both race as well as gender. And then the next slide, you'll see this is specifically of the 23 complaints that were received in September. So these are the demographics of race and gender for those complaints that were received and submitted in the month of September. The next slide goes to the complaint allegations. So these are the year to date, all of the allegations that we received. Here's the breakdown of the different percents. And it should be noted that one complaint submitted to CPOC can have multiple allegations. So these are the total of all allegations that we found for complaints referred to internal affairs. The highest percent you'll see is sort of lack of service. And then just below that is departmental violations. And on our next slide, we break down sort of what the biggest categories of departmental violations are. These are sort of all the subcategories. You'll see directive violations, improper stop, refusal to provide badge or name, and so on and so forth. So those are the breakdowns of that percent. I believe it was 27% of departmental violations. Our next slide shows all of the zip codes where we've seen the most complaints. And the little map next to it, you'll see is sort of a breakdown specifically of the districts for the city of Philadelphia. And something to note is that there are zip codes that span different districts. The other thing to note is one of the things that we're going to hopefully do at the end of this year is give sort of a list of all the complaints by district. We're starting to track that as of this current month. And so our hope is to do sort of a quarterly report in the future of complaints by district and just like a tally and do that quarterly. And our hope is to probably put that into effect at the beginning of January when we have a full complete collection. Since this is specific data, it takes a little bit more specific work when we're doing these complaints, since zip codes don't always equate to the same district. But our hope is to start being able to tally that out a little bit more specifically. And that sort of ends the report on complaint data for this year. Do any commissioners have any questions? Going once, going twice. I will then pass it over to Layla.
Thanks, Danny. I'm gonna go into some of the work that's happening in the policy unit. And one of the pieces of work that's going on in that unit is the charging unit review, which reviews all complaints against police made by community members if a sustained allegation is found by IAD. So that case would then go over and advance to CPOC's charging unit for review. And CPOC's charging unit would make recommendations to PBI's charging captain based on the sustained allegations and also the September 2021 disciplinary code, which kind of highlights the charges that can be made for those sustained misconduct allegations. So here's a little bit of an overview of some of the sustained allegations that came between September 1st of this year and October 18th. So just at the end of last week, this information is current. So it's 26 total sustained allegations from complaints against police from 23 officers. So kind of just how complaints have multiple allegations. Officers can be charged with multiple charges or have multiple sustained allegations against them when their misconduct gets sent over to PBI's charging unit for review. So 26 sustained allegations, 23 officers. So 10 of those 26 sustained allegations went to charges. So that means there was a section of the discipline code assigned to it, and that charge will be moving forward either to some form of formal discipline by PPD. And then of the 26, 16 were referred to training and counseling. A lot of those were first offenses for body-worn camera or lack of service allegations or mistakes made in forms that were completed by officers after incidences occurred. For those 10 charges, there were verbal abuse allegations charged and unprofessional conduct. And then if an officer has a second offense for mistakes made during forms or body-worn camera violations, so more tactical sort of violations, those misconduct allegations get assigned a charge. And so that's kind of the look of those 10. I would say that this information, right, so I have to the left or to the right of the screen, 62% resulted in training and counseling, while 38% resulted in charges. I wouldn't say that's like a good example of a year's worth of sustained allegations that we review. This is just a quick glance at September through mid-October. But I would say that oftentimes we've seen in the last year or so that more often than not, a lot of the allegations that become sustained are referred to training and counseling, because most of the time they are first offenses for body-worn camera or lack of service. So what happens next? I'm gonna just kind of give an overview of the PPD's disciplinary procedure, which is available in PPD's Directive 8.6. This is kind of just an overview to kind of give a look, and this is available just Googling Philadelphia Police Department Directive 8.6. You can look through all of these directives online, but this kind of just gives an overview of that process and why discipline is engaged. And so we'll go into the next slide where we'll have a little bit more information. So one of the first options for when reviewing sustained allegations is to see if an officer kind of has had that allegation sustained against them in the past. And oftentimes, if this is the first time that officer has done that type of misconduct, they'll receive training and counseling, which means that they'll receive a memo that IAD investigation determined that a policy violation occurred, and that will have more information about corrective guidance to help correct that information or that conduct going forward. And then that information is kept in the officer's internal personnel record, where PPD personnel have the ability to review and look back at that information to see if training counseling has been assigned for any disciplinary outcomes in the past. If you look onto the right screen here, under 3A, section 2, says, once the PBI charging unit has thoroughly reviewed the investigation, the commanding officer of the charging unit shall either file formal disciplinary charges or require formal training and counseling to address the sustained department violation. So that's kind of just giving an overview that officers can get training and counseling or a formal disciplinary outcome, and also have those charges come through. But training and counseling, to be clear, is not a formal disciplinary outcome. It is meant to be more of a corrective guidance sort of outcome. So if formal discipline is assigned and a charge is assigned, there are a few options that could take place. So if an officer pleads guilty, or there is a commissioner direct action that takes place, no PBI hearing will go forward. The department and the officer agree to the guilt charge and what that punishment will look like. Or the commissioner, right, may enforce discipline directly under certain circumstances. And those kind of go into more detail in the directive. But then if an officer decides to not plead guilty, the PBI hearing will take place. So the Police Board of Inquiry panelists will participate in a hearing and listen to the prosecution, the administrative prosecution of that officer, and make recommendations to the police commissioner for formal discipline. And members of CPOC are, one member of CPOC is a panelist on that PBI panel when officers are under administrative prosecution. So that's the end of the information about charging, and I'm going to be transitioning to some resources that were made available to the policy unit at NACL, but I wanted to see if anybody had any questions before I moved on. All right. So I'm going to go on then to those policy resources really quickly.
I'm sorry, this is Commissioner
Oh.
Solomon here.
Yes.
Can you provide the name of the one person that's a part of CPOC that's actually a part of the one of the people that's part of the PBI hearings?
Yeah, so lots of our members of our staff participate in PBI hearings. I think actually only a few members of our staff don't, and it's because, like myself, I participate in the charging unit review. And so I have been able to review the case much more thoroughly prior to the hearing. And so I don't sit on those panels, but I think, Danny also might be able to share a little bit more about the members of our staff who do, but I know many of us do.
Yeah, I'd say about 2/3 of the staff sit on it. It's a rotating schedule, so one person is assigned. Typically, they only do hearings Monday through Thursdays, and not every day has a hearing. So typically, I'd say like most staffs, I'd say 2/3 of our staff sit on PBI panels, and typically everybody does like one a month or so, pretty often. So that to give you an idea of a sense of like how many are happening, if that's answers your question.
Yes, it does. I thought that it was like, one person in particular that was part of those PBI hearings. So that I got more clarity. Thank you.
Of course.
Great question. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, just a few more slides now from NACL, the policy resources. I wanted to highlight this one because it specifically talked about transforming policy through storytelling. This one was actually, as Director McClary mentioned, there were during this NACL, there were members of prison oversight who were also there to kind of share their experiences. And then this session actually advocates from groups that do police oversight, jail death oversight, and then oversight for issues facing jailed individuals with mental health needs, pregnancy, or serious mental illness. They all shared stories relating to their family members about incidences that led from tragedy in their families to transformative change in legislation. It was a really powerful panel, and they were able to kind of discuss what they looked for in stories from impacted community members and how those stories informed data that should be collected and research design, as well as how to kind of structure community conversations when you're really having those hard conversations about public safety and how that's impacting public harm. That was really informative for me, and I really enjoyed that session, and I know a few of us did as well. The next session was actually about public order policing. So experts kind of discussed recent efforts to professionalize public order policing, which is just law enforcement practices during protests, which is a really current sort of issue that's been happening lately in the United States. So they discuss kind of cultural competency and de-escalation tactics, including what they call dialogue policing, which encourage, as you see in this picture here on one of the slides, it encouraged legitimacy and self-regulation amongst those who are marching in the streets. It created more of a collaborative environment where it felt less adversarial and more like everybody wants to make sure that people's First Amendment rights were being respected, people were out there to be safe, and people were out there to make sure that their voices were being heard. And once that sort of was legitimized on both sides, it allowed for much less uses of force. So they said in their examples, they said that there had been 13,500 attendees at these protests, and it resulted in 2 minor uses of force and 4 arrests, which, if you think about the numbers between the number of attendees and the number of incidences, they really highlighted that as like a victory for them. All right. I also wanted to kind of bring through civilian oversight in Phoenix was a big highlight at this NACL. Since we were in Tucson, we were in Arizona. Phoenix was a newly implemented oversight body by Councilmember Carlos Garcia, who's down there, and he sort of orchestrated that its passage. But so it started out right with a broad amount of power. It was an investigative body that was granted that authority by its legislation, right? So they were able to really do independent investigations and also kind of really take hold of and create police oversight in the city of Phoenix. But one of the big stories that came out of this oversight board, which is called OAT, by the way, is that they face preemption at the state level. So their state Congress, right, their state representatives passed legislation that gutted its authority to do independent investigations, and they call that preemption. So it just kind of says, hey, oversight boards in this state can only do these certain things. And that was really alarming to us. And it was definitely something that, you know, we're going to be monitoring moving forward because that type of political change can really, right, like hamstring an agency that is just getting its feet on the ground and really starting to go forward with oversight. Preemption can really be a danger to oversight agencies. So I thought I would share a little bit more about that agency as well. And then I have one last slide, if you all will bear with me. This one is about the law enforcement interactions with persons experiencing behavioral health crises that Tanya mentioned previously. And, you know, this session was mostly led by law enforcement offices in California, in Burbank and in Eureka. So Southern California and also Northern California, where different demographics and different needs exist, kind of presented their co-responder models. And I wanted to highlight that PPD does have a behavioral health unit, which also leads with a co-responder model, which co-responder model means an officer who is armed with all of their usual uniform, and then licensed social worker go out to respond to behavioral health crises together. And we were able to see a demonstration of that take place. And I also wanted to flag that PPD's behavioral health unit, CPOC, has done an explainer about that unit in the past, and that information is available on our website if you Google CPOC behavioral health explainer. And so, you know, they gave a little bit more information, but I think, you know, law enforcement that respond most effectively do so when they do collaboration with their partners who are professionals in mental health and behavioral health. And so there, you know, the stat was provided that they're 10 times more likely to be injured during interactions with police when a behavioral health professional isn't there. So just wanted to highlight that. And I think too, just wanted to also flag that a big part of that session was folks kind of pushing back and also mentioning that there are models that are civilian only led there in different cities, and they hoped that there would be more discussion about the civilian only led versus the law enforcement and social worker led groups. And so I just wanted to name that was definitely part of that discussion as well. Do the commissioners have any questions about that? I really went through quite a bit there. All right.
Before we go into auditing, I do want to flag a couple of things that Layla talked about. So in New Orleans, form a group called Families Overcoming Injustice. And it was a group made up of, unfortunately, family members of people that had been killed by the New Orleans Police Department. So when she talks about people being able to make an impact, and so that group came together and they actually did what's called the Family Bill of Rights. It might be the only one in the country where the police department, it took a long time to get them to agree to these things, but the police department has now adopted this Family Bill of Rights. And what was really and why it's called that is because they felt that if someone was going to be killed by the police department, there are certain rights that the family should have. And so it was very eye-opening for me working with them, because some of the things that they talked about when you heard them talk about it, it was like, duh, that makes total sense. But I think it's something that we wouldn't think about unless we were in that circumstance. So I've talked to my staff. So for example, just something as simple as having screens to cover the body of the person that was killed, because they talked about you know, just their loved one just being on the ground, right? Just out in plain view for everybody to see as they're collecting evidence, etc. And there's some dignity even in the person's death that should happen. And so every district in New Orleans now has a screen that they bring out, and they cover the body of the person that has been killed. Other things including, you know, we try to notify us before you release body worn camera. New Orleans is a city that releases it. People talked about just cutting the news on and finding out that their loved one had been killed. So it's things like this. And there was a lot of debate about first aid. Some families didn't want the officers to render first aid, right? They were like, if the officer just killed my loved one, I don't know that I trust them to render it. And then other people said, but no, they have to keep that duty of you know, trying to save the human life. And so I think hearing from directly impacted people is extremely crucial. I could talk more about that, but it was really an amazing opportunity, a very humbling opportunity to work with this group, to bring them together and to help be that bridge to help all the things. And I'm really just giving you some of the high level, very detailed things now that the New Orleans Police Department has to do for families if they kill somebody in the line of duty. And so that's just one concrete example of a city that I've worked with, that I was able to work with the impacted families. I also want to let the commission know and the community know that our director of policy, Anastasia McCarthy, resigned. And so just wanted people to know that in case they don't see Miss McCarthy. We always try to be transparent, not only with our commissioners, but with the public. And so with that, it gives me as a director an opportunity to think about maybe doing some reorganization in the office. And so commissioners, as I think through that process, I will bring you in on what I'm thinking about, what I'm hoping to do with some of the positions in the office. But I did want to acknowledge her in her absence and her work that she has done for the last several years in developing us in policy. And so I also want to appreciate Layla for stepping up tonight on such short notice and doing a phenomenal job of representing the work of the policy unit. So I believe in giving people their flowers while they're alive. So if she's watching this, or if she watches it in the future, we want to let her know that she was appreciated in the work that she did for this agency and moving it forward as the very first policy director. We're looking forward to seeing where we go in the future in terms of our policy work. And Layla, once again, thank you for stepping in for us and doing an excellent job.
Okay, that brings it to me. So I'm Janine, the director of the Auditing and Monitoring Unit, and I have a number of slides that I put together that have a lot of data that we were able to collect over the last 3 months. So between July and about mid-September, it was our first batch. You can go back, Danny. Thanks. It was our first batch of expanded audits that we were able to do. So that entails our auditing team receiving the full investigative case file for complaints against police. And we receive it at a point in the process when the complaint has not yet been closed. So we're able to review the investigation, review the investigative findings, and essentially sign off on them and say whether we feel like the investigation was thorough and complete and neutral. And if we find that there were any issues or if we have any concerns, we can send the case back. We send a memo with our feedback back to Internal Affairs and give specific recommendations for what we think should change within the investigation before it gets closed. So our team has 10 business days to complete our reviews once we receive an investigation. So it's a pretty quick turnaround time, especially if we are receiving a high volume of these investigations at a time. So we have a staff of 3 in my unit, and plus me as the supervisor. So it is a lot of work and can be a pretty high volume situation. So the team has done a really great job of completing a lot of cases and doing this work really thoroughly and giving some really solid recommendations back to the department for these cases. While we aren't doing independent investigations into complaints yet at CPOC, this is really the next best thing and is a way for our office to have direct oversight over the investigations that Internal Affairs is doing. So this is really impactful. Again, this is a pretty new process that we've developed, and I'm really proud that we've been able to do this work. It is really important. It's unprecedented. It is, I think, a really big deal that we're able to accomplish this and get these reviews done. So I will keep driving that home any chance I get, because this is really important sort of boots on the ground oversight work that we're able to do. Okay, you can move to the next slide, Danny. So we were able to do 85 of these audits between July 2nd and September 13th. So again, staff of 3. That was a lot of work, and these case files can be hundreds of pages long depending on the investigation. So it is very, very labor intensive. So of those 85 cases, we had specific feedback to offer in 59 of them, and we wrote feedback memos that went back to the department for those. And we made 155 individual recommendations in these cases. So we typically weren't giving one recommendation in a case. It was often more than one that we were sending back for additional attention. So these memos that we create go to the deputy commissioner at the police department, who is over internal affairs. So that when he is doing his review of these cases, he's seeing the recommendations and the feedback that we are giving. Some feedback he has given to us is that he is often agreeing with what we are saying. He'll see our feedback and say he has the exact same thoughts. So that's been really positive. It's been great to know that we're on the same page with a lot of this stuff. So ultimately what ends up happening is the investigator creates a response to our memo and sends it back to us. So that's been a little bit slow in us getting those responses back from the internal affairs investigators. But of the responses that we've collected and been able to go through and log so far, our recommendations have been accepted and rejected at about the same rates. So we aren't getting, universal acceptance of all the recommendations we're making, but we are getting about half and half with our recommendations, and we'll keep collecting that data and reporting out on it. Our recommendations are just recommendations. They're not binding. The department is not required to accept them. But hopefully as we continue doing this work, they'll start to appreciate our work a little bit more and see that we are really just trying to improve the quality of these cases for the residents and the complainants who are making these complaints, and also for the officers who are the subject of these investigations. Next slide, please. So this chart is showing of the 85 audits that we did, what types of encounters with police were resulting in these complaints being filed. So often it was a call for service made by the complainant and resulted in some sort of encounter that the individual wanted to file a complaint about. So that's someone seeking service of some kind and then having an encounter go south and want to file a complaint about it. Vehicle stops were also quite common, reasons that people filed complaints, and then officers responding to some other type of radio call were also pretty common reasons for complaints being filed. Next slide, please. So one question we ask in every case is, was the case properly classified by Internal Affairs? And why is this important? So when Internal Affairs first receives a complaint against police, they review the initial information they have and they give it a classification. And that classification is used to report on data publicly by the department. So it is also used to determine if the complaint gets a full investigation. There's certain types of cases, if it's an officer's first complaint that they're receiving and it's a minor lack of service case or verbal abuse case, that complaint can get handled by the officer supervisor and not by a full investigation. So it's this classification that's made when the complaint is first filed that's really crucial to how the investigation moves forward or doesn't. So we're checking to see if that classification is accurate. And in about 85% of the cases, it was accurate. But then in about 15% of the times, it was not accurate. And so that can be problematic because their data may not be totally accurate as they're reporting out about complaints to the public. And then some cases may be going back to an officer supervisor when it should have gone to a full investigation. So that's something we're going to keep looking at and making recommendations to the department to make sure they're being accurate there. Thank you. As I was speaking about classifications, I have this chart here to show the most common classifications in complaints that are filed in this batch of 85 cases. Lack of service was the most common one. So someone complaining that officers never responded to their 911 call, or the officer wrote an inaccurate report. Those are common types of lack of service complaints, followed by departmental violations, as Danny mentioned in the complaint data. That's a very wide-ranging category. And then physical abuse and verbal abuse also showed up there. Next slide, please. Okay, on to timeliness. So timeliness is a statistic that the department pays a lot of attention to when it comes to investigations. They aim and are dictated by an executive order that they should be completing their investigations within 90 days. And within this batch of 85 audits, their compliance rate with that 90-day guideline was 82%. So that's pretty good and is an improvement in some of the data that we have seen over the past couple of years. And we noted that 90% of the cases were completed within that 90-day range, or they had a good reason for exceeding that 90-day guideline. So that means that about 15 of the cases that weren't done in 90 days, only 8 of them had an unclear or insufficient explanation for why it went over that 90-day timeline. So we always want them to just explain what happened with the case. Why did it go over 90 days? Sometimes there may not be a good explanation, and that becomes difficult for them to sort of write around in their reports. Next slide, please. Another thing we look at is whether the investigator is reaching out to all of the civilians who were involved in the complaint. So that includes the person who made the complaint in the first place, any additional victims, maybe if it was a car stop, there's a driver and a passenger, or any witnesses that the complainant provides. We found that in about 45% of the time that the investigator was properly reaching out to all of these civilians involved. And then about the same amount, 40%, they were not. So we were using these different contact attempts listed out: an email, 1 phone call, 48 message delivery, and letters sent in the US mail. We were using that as a guideline for the contact attempts investigators should be making. It turns out that in our discussions with PPD about their compliance with this these civilian contacts, we were misinterpreting their policy a little bit, but within these conversations we had with internal affairs, they are now updating their policy so that there's a very clear minimum set of required contact attempts to civilian parties in complaints against police. So that hasn't been determined yet what that will be, but they're going to make a more clear rule for investigators so that the investigators must reach out by 2 phone calls to a complainant and 2 letters, or whatever the case may be. So that will help make things a little more clear for how these cases should proceed. We also are always looking at the language within the PC memo or the report of investigation that is summarizing the investigation. We're always looking to see, is the language in that memo neutral, or is it possibly favoring one perspective over another? So a key tenet of investigations is to be neutral and fact-based and list only the facts, not let any personal feelings or biases sway how an investigation ends up. And happy to report that in 80% of the cases, or I'm sorry, 94% of the cases, there was no evidence of favoring one perspective. The language was neutral and all looked above board. And only a small handful of cases, 5, there was some indication that maybe there was some not neutral language present. We're also looking to see, are these reports of investigations clear? Are they clearly articulating the incident that happened and giving the reader a really clear picture of what happened in the incident? This is really important because as cases and investigations move forward in the discipline process, any number of people could be reading these reports of investigations. So Layla could read it in the charging unit, and she would want to be able to see what happened in the case and be able to clearly give discipline charges. Attorneys could be reading this, even a future arbitrator, if the case goes all the way through the discipline process. And it's all these stages are really crucial for determining outcomes, determining whether an officer is held accountable. So making a clear report of investigation is very, very important. 92% of the time we were seeing clear reports, but in about 7% of the cases, the reports were not clear, they were confusing, and we would be requesting some clarity to those reports in a feedback memo. Next slide, please. One really great part of this process of doing these expanded audits is that we are now getting access to the body-worn camera footage for these investigations. So something really important is reviewing those body-worn camera videos and then seeing if the investigator accurately summarized everything on those video recordings. So 48 of the 85 cases that we reviewed had body-worn camera footage available for us to review. In most of those cases, so about in 37 of those, the body-worn camera footage was accurately summarized and everything looked good, but in 11 cases, the footage was not accurately summarized. So one example that stands out to me was there was an interaction between a civilian and an officer, and the civilian was very upset. They were being uncooperative and using profane language with the officer. And the investigator summarized that all very clearly in the report of investigation. But when we watched the body-worn camera, the officer was also using profanity, using threatening language, and that was not included in the investigator's summary of the footage. So that would sort of be an example of maybe a not neutral situation in the report. It's also showing that, you know, some very key pieces related to the officer's behavior was being left out. So we would send a recommendation to say everything needs to be included about everybody in these videos. And so having access to this footage lets us compare what we see to how it is described in the PC memo. Something else about watching these body-worn camera videos is that we can see if there's additional violations present. Just like I mentioned in the last slide, there's additional threatening language used by officers. And so we would recommend that be added to the investigation and the officer be held accountable for that behavior and their actions related to that. So in 11 of the cases that we looked at, there were additional violations present in the body-worn camera footage. So they can be small administrative violations or bigger things like related to their conduct with civilians. So we will add any violations that we see and make sure that any improper behavior can be corrected regardless if the complainant noticed it in their interaction with the officer or not. By having access to the full case file, we're able to review every interview memo that the investigators create for their investigations and see what kind of, you know, how thorough everything is within the investigation. So we can see in interview memos if there's any indication that there's additional witnesses or additional evidence that the investigator didn't follow through on. So in about 15% of the cases, 14% of the cases, we did find that additional information was provided in the interviews that the investigator didn't follow up on. So that's obviously a problem because it's showing that maybe an investigation wasn't completed properly based on the evidence that was out there. We also are looking to see if the investigator interviewed all officers connected to the investigation, and if they didn't, did they explain why? And so in about 20% of the cases, they did not interview all of the officers that were present and didn't explain that choice that they made in the investigation. And explanations for things like that are so important because without an explanation, it looks like an oversight or it looks like something the investigator just forgot to do. So if that's not the case, we would definitely want to see an explanation to have them sort of show their work and help us understand how they did this investigation. Next slide, please. And with interviews, we want to see if they're asking proper follow-up questions. That's just a key piece of doing an investigation, listening in an interview and then knowing what types of follow-up questions to ask. We found that officers or the investigators performed slightly better in civilian interviews and asking the proper follow-up questions and getting more details. Officer interviews were slightly less thorough, would sort of tend to be yes, no questions, and maybe the investigator wasn't properly following up. So that's something we're going to keep paying attention to, and hopefully we can see some improvement on. Regarding findings of the investigations, we found that almost 80% of cases, the findings were reasonable, they were logical, we could understand how the investigator came to these findings in the investigation. We really want the findings to match the facts and the analysis in the case, and this is just about fairness to the complainant and to the officer who's the subject of the complaint. We find sometimes different types of findings for these allegations are maybe not used properly. So we want to make sure findings are accurate, so an officer's record really reflects the facts of a case and the facts of an investigation. A good thing is that we don't often see or we don't really ever see findings that are wildly off base. So we've never seen a case where there's all this evidence that misconduct occurred and then the finding isn't showing that. So that's a positive sign that things are generally going well in that department. Something that I've talked about in these presentations previously and will continue to look at is if all allegations and violations that were present in the incident were addressed by the investigation. And we would, in this batch, half of the cases we reviewed had missing allegations. So that comes down to the investigator being thorough and making sure that every possible piece of misconduct present is being brought against the officers involved. An example of a minor violation that we may see is an officer who does a traffic stop or stops a car. They are supposed to go over police radio and say they are doing a traffic stop when they're doing one. But they don't always do that. And that is a really important thing for officer safety, for civilian safety. And it may seem like a very minor violation. And PPD sometimes may not want to discipline officers for that. But when we see a violation like that happening, we're going to call it out and say that we see it because it is, again, about safety for everyone. The most common missing allegations tend to relate to use of body-worn cameras and also officer conduct while interacting with civilians. So the next slide has just a list of the most common missing allegations that we found. Again, failure to activate body-worn cameras at the top of the list. Some other departmental violations like that radio example I just gave, and then unprofessional conduct and verbal abuse. So we look for these allegations. Again, complainants may not be aware of these things happening, and so they wouldn't know to complain about if an officer activated their body-worn camera. But we are always going to look for that because body-worn cameras are so important for accountability, and they should always be on when they're supposed to be. Next slide, please. So this is sort of, I think maybe my last slide, but just some takeaways here is that these audits that we've done have generated really productive discussions with PPD about IED processes. We've been able to show just how knowledgeable we are about their work and have had some good conversations with them about how they can improve their processes, bringing a civilian oversight perspective to these investigations and these conversations with the department has been an overall really positive experience. And every audit that we do helps to build our knowledge base internally. Our operational knowledge is only growing, strengthens our toolkit as we look towards CPOC's growth in the world of investigation. So we receive these new cases for audits every day, and we'll continue our reviews and continue reporting on this data to everybody. I think that's it for me. Any questions, if anyone has, I'd be happy to answer if I can.
Am I able to be seen and heard?
Yep.
This is Commissioner DeBose. I don't have a question, but I do have a comment with regard to the report you've given and the reports that preceded yours. I continue to be grateful for the detailed information that is being disseminated. at this time, and the level of just accountability to your particular areas of focus and the level of transparency to the extent that you're able to give it. I'm appreciative of how we are being kept informed. If I can go back to Layla's report, she lifted up some policies and practices, and Director McClary added that I believe it was the city of Detroit that has a parents or a what does she call them? A Bill of Rights. I don't know if it was for parents or for families. Families Bill of Rights. We have had a similar practice, and I am certain here in Philadelphia that I'm certain is not on paper, and it went like this: the PPD, the Office of the District Attorney, and clergy who were perhaps close in proximity geographically to a case here, to cases here in Philadelphia, would be asked to give consideration as to the timing and the process for the releasing of body-worn camera footage, for example. This is important because, as Director McClary mentioned, sometimes this information will come out on the news without the family having the privilege or having been given the respect of being able to view the footage or to know what was being exposed. My question is for Director McClary. Do you have a vision for a path forward for our developing? So we have something, but I don't believe we have anything in writing. Do you have a vision for our being able to develop here in the city of Philadelphia a family's Bill of Rights? And does that vision include developing it internally, or should we be looking to some external entities like collaboration with PPD and the Office of the District Attorney and perhaps clergy who have been involved in other civil rights groups who have been involved in this process? Do you see this Bill of Rights being developed internally by CPOC, or should we seek external entities and collaborate with them? Director McClary.
So Commissioner DeBose, I think it's going to be both. I think we need to sit down with impacted families in Philadelphia and find out what their experiences have been, and start to craft this Bill of Rights around things that they have experienced. And I think we're going to have to get partners. So, for example, another thing that Oversight does, and in both of the other cities that I had before I came to you all, was that we show the videos to the families. Families don't often want to sit down with the police department right after their loved one was killed, unjustified or justified. And so there's a role for us in a lot of the things that potentially would be in that bill, but I think it's going to be collaborative. But I think that we need to start with us and the impacted family to develop what those things are. And then in order to have some of those things happen, I think we will probably have to collaborate. But I think it would, starting with this body, those families, and potential clergy and others, we craft what it is that we want to, I don't want to say demand, but I'm going to say demand from the police department. In terms of what should be happening when someone's loved one. And this is regardless of justification or non-justification, because as the head of this agency, to me, all life is valuable. So whether the loved one was allegedly committing a crime or not, that is still somebody's loved one, and they deserve to have rights. So I think it's going to be a combination of both, Commissioner, and I would look forward to working with the commission, my team, and other community stakeholders with the families to develop the ask, put it together, and then move forward on how we get it passed through.
Well, I reserve the right to have further conversation with you and let you know some of the members of the community and clergy groups that have been involved in this process in an, I guess you would say, an unofficial capacity. And at least there's a relationship with those entities, PPD, the Department of or the Larry Krasner's office and clergy. We can start there after we have established what we want internally. We can start there with some of those clergy groups and representatives and see if a conversation can't be had. Because we are and have maintained contact with many of the families who have been harmed through some act of misconduct or whatever has caused the loss of their loved one. So yeah, I'll be glad to have further conversation with you so that we can move on this sooner than later.
It's extremely important and it's very valuable and would really aid into the work that that we're doing here in the city of Philadelphia.
Yes. So thank you all again for your reports, for the information, thorough, accessible, and really keeps us informed as to how we're doing and the fact that we should and do have our fingers on the pulse of what's going on in our city with regard to relationships that have been so eroded between the people of the city and the officers. So thank you again for the thoroughness of these reports.
If I were to add anything, it would only mimic Commissioner DeVos. I do have a question for as far as the civil rights complaints. Could you tell us like what kind of civil rights complaint it was?
I don't have the information like off the top right now. But I can follow up with you offline if that would be helpful.
That's fine. That's fine.
Mr. Chairman, that is the director's portion of the meeting, and I turn things back over to you, sir.
Thank you. We're back at that time of the meeting again. Community comments. As most judges do when they read jurors' instructions, I will be reading this directly off of a paper, so there's no, to maintain consistency and there's no discrepancies from a meeting to meeting basis. Here we go. We welcome public comments and feedback. Please be advised your comments. No, please address your comments to the chair. If you would like to speak, please provide your full name. We will not be unmuting anonymous participants. If you are a member of the media, please identify yourself as such. You can indicate that you would like to speak by raising your hand or sending a request to the meeting host in the chat. You may also submit public comment through the chat. You will have 3 minutes to address the commissioners. I will keep time and notify the board when 3 minutes have elapsed. Any documents or follow-up communications can be submitted to CPOC at phila.gov. That is CPOC at phila.gov. Public comments should be limited to the topic covered in this meeting. All public commenters must refrain from offensive language, threats, harassment. Participants that violate these instructions will be removed from the meeting. While we welcome your public comments and feedback, Commissioners may not be able to respond to your questions or comments during tonight's meeting. Every attempt will be made to follow up by phone or email after the meeting. You can contact cpoc@phila.gov or call 215-685-0891. That is 215-685-0891. And with that being said, do we have any comments?
I don't have any registered people to speak. I don't have any questions in the chat. I don't know if we want to do like last time, Chair, and
I
put
don't
a
think I
little.
want to do it like last time, Dan.
Okay.
I think I'll give them, I'm not giving them 3 minutes. I think I'll give them 45 seconds.
Well, why don't I take this moment just to point out on our agenda that our next meetings in November will be on the 14th and the 21st. Those are both Thursdays, just due to the Thanksgiving holiday. And similarly, in December, we'll be doing our meetings on the 12th and the 19th, also due to the holidays. Additionally, we have 2 open PBI hearings that'll that folks can attend. They're on the 31st and 30th of October. So next Wednesday and Thursday, if anyone from the public would like to attend, those are open to the public.
So we started this meeting at 6:10. It's now 7:56 p.m. Does any commissioners have any comments? Any additional comments?
None.
No commissioners? Well, with that being said, and it's no public comments, do we have a motion to adjourn?
I move that this motion be adjourned,
Does anyone
that
second?
this meeting be adjourned, I'm sorry.
Does anyone second that motion?
Commissioner PA seconds the motion.
With that being said, all in favor of this motion, please say aye. Aye. And this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Good evening. Y'all
have a
have an
great evening.
amazing evening.
Thank you.